Will the messenger of Islam be killed while I am alive? Tomorrow Europe will know the consequence of her order.
Big armies marching for one Muslim man. At a time when the feet of Muslims were heavy, and the prestige of the individual from the prestige of the group, the columns of the Crusaders were crushed and opened the strongest fortresses to restore the prestige of Islam and Muslims, and break the banner of polytheism and polytheists. They crushed Hungary's ancient empire, led by Gazi Suleiman the Magnificent, and the necks of Europeans were subjugated to Muslims. For more than 3 centuries, conquest of Belgrade. But in the beginning, don't forget to support us by subscribing to the channel and liking the video and watch it to the end, because the interaction of the channel extremely weak. With your support we grow and continue, inshallah. 48 years, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent spent it at the top of power in the Ottoman Caliphate, during which he reached the pinnacle of power and authority. And the German historian Hammer said about him, "This sultan was more dangerous to us than Saladin." This sultan was more dangerous to us than Saladin. In a form it has never happened before, and extended its authority over many countries of the world and its 3 continents, and extended its prestige to include the whole world. She became the master of the world and was the great power in the time of Sultan Suleiman. And the systems and laws that run life in accuracy and order have risen in it, without violating the provisions of Islamic Sharia, which the Ottoman family was keen to respect and abide by. Arts and literature rose in it, and architecture and construction flourished. Was the beginning of Sultan Suleiman's reign as strong as history as a whole of his life? The events of the battle begin with the accession of Suleiman the Magnificent to power as a young man of 26 years after the death of his father Sultan Sulaimi. Strife and conflicts were widespread inside the capital, and rebellions and revolutions outside it, such as the rebellion of Jean Bardi al-Ghazali in Damascus and the rebellion of Ahmed Pasha the traitor in Egypt. The first thing the Ottoman Sultan did was to stabilize the pillars of his rule and send a campaign to eliminate rebellion and strife in the Levant. He then sent letters to the kings of Europe informing them of the succession after his father and ordering them to pay the prescribed tribute, as was happening during the reign of his father, Sulaimi. He was among the apostles Bahram Kavush, the personal envoy of the Ottoman Sultan to the Kingdom of Hungary, who went to renew treaties and receive the annual tribute money. When Bahram Kavush entered upon the King of Hungary, Louis II, who had taken a decision to refuse to hand over the tribute, believing that the young caliph was a weak sultan. And with a sign from Louis II, the covenant is betrayed and the king's guards pounce on the dearest prophet, and they cut him off his head. When the news reached the palace of the Ottoman Sultan, the Grand Vizier Pierre Mohammed Pasha entered to inform the Sultan, the first of which was to eliminate the rebellion in the Levant, and presented him with the head of the traitor Jean Bardi al-Ghazali. As for the second news, Pierre Mehmed Pasha stood up and could not speak, so the Sultan ordered him to speak, and he told him that news had arrived from Hungary that King Louis II had beheaded Bahram Kavush. Sultan Suleiman was shocked and angry, rose up standing up, and said his famous sentence that was immortalized in history: "I will kill the messenger of Islam while I am alive. Tomorrow Europe will know the consequences of its matter." The Sultan began preparing and planning for a battle that would break Hungary's thorn. He sent delegations to the Arabian Peninsula to buy 30,000 camels, whose mission was to transport supplies and ammunition to the Danube River, and he bought 10,000 wagons to transport barley and flour. And you can imagine from the preparations the size of the Ottoman army, whose preparation in some sources reached 250,000 soldiers. The Sultan consulted the leaders, and the ministers are on the face of the army, so there were 2 opinions. The first is to walk to Budin, the capital of Hungary, in which the incident of killing the ambassador took place, but this was considered an unrealistic opinion. The second opinion is the direction of the strongest castle in Europe, Belgrade Castle, Central European gateway and fortress of Christianity. The importance of the site on which Belgrade is based appears in the 10th century AH at the height of the war between the Ottoman Empire and Hungary, which revived the Crusader spirit in Europe again during this century, and Belgrade was the border fortress of Hungary, so it became a symbol that means a lot to all the countries of Europe in the event of its steadfastness or fall. It is enough for you to know that the Ottoman Empire, which defeated the Byzantines, Serbs, and Bulgarians and controlled all of Eastern Europe, failed to complete their conquests because of Hungary, specifically the fortress of Belgrade, which was besieged 3 times, and they all failed. The first of them was at the hands of Sultan Murad II in the year 845 Hijri. At that time, Pope Eugenius IV announced a crusade against the Ottomans to expel them from Europe, and Murad II could not open the castle, but the Ottomans continued after that to conquer Belgrade, and to realize the strength and immunity of this castle. Let me tell you that the geography of the city is the same as the geography of the city of Constantinople, surrounded by water from 3 sides. Even Sultan Mehmed the conqueror of the Byzantines and the conqueror of Constantinople, was unable to face its fortifications and was seriously injured. And when he withdrew from in front of its huge walls, he said, "May God bring out from my grandchildren who will open that city by his hands." Returning to Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent, who completed the equipping of the army and determined to open Belgrade for political, strategic, and religious considerations. With his great political acumen, he was able to neutralize the European powers from intervening to save Belgrade, such as the Venetian state, which was negotiating a trade treaty with the Ottomans, and it was not in its interest to enter into a war against the Ottomans in favor of Hungary. As for the Vatican and the King of Poland, they did not find the justification for intervening to support Belgrade, and even the French advised the Hungarian king to conclude a truce with Suleiman the Magnificent in order to gain time. And the Ottoman Sultan came out at the head of the army and put the greatest vizier, Pierre Mohammed Pasha, at the head of the leaders, with Minister Mustafa Pasha and Ahmed Pasha next to Khosrow Bey. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent insisted that the day of his departure in the army be a memorable day witnessed by the ambassadors of foreign countries in the Ottoman Empire, and the goal was to carry out psychological warfare against Hungary and a second psychological war against the Europeans, so that they would think 1,000 times before helping Belgrade. In implementation of the plan, Minister Ahmed Pasha headed with part of the army towards the city of Shates, which is located north of Belgrade, and was besieged, and another part of the Muslim army, under the command of the Grand Vizier Pierre Mohammed Pasha, went out in the direction of Belgrade to tighten the noose on it. On the 2nd of Shaban, in the year 927 AH, the city of Skites fell to the Muslims, and on the orders of Pierre Mohammed Pasha, a group of Ottoman battalions graduated. Under the command of Khosrow Bey, they headed to the fortress of Asman near Belgrade and besieged the city to secure the supply lines, which easily fell into the hands of Muslims. After that, Sultan Suleiman moved with the army in the direction of the city of Skites, and from there to Belgrade in the heart of Europe, and pitched his tent near the castle of Asman. After the siege plan was drawn up, Grand Vizier Pierre Mohammed Pasha and his forces moved. He besieged the city from the south, and at the same time Minister Mustafa Pasha besieged the city from the north, and Ahmed Pasha went with the rest of the soldiers to besiege the city from the west. Sultan Suleiman ordered that the ships and warboats, which were carried with supplies, be equipped and disembarked on the Danube. The ships were able to transport Ottoman cannons to an island near Belgrade. The Ottoman army launched the attack, and the Ottoman cannons began to destroy the forts, and for 7 continuous days the beating was continuous. The artillery forces were able to penetrate the first wall of the city, so the Muslims launched various attacks on the city, but they were surprised by higher and larger walls than the first and found a desperate defense from the city's garrison. So the Ottoman Sultan gave the order to the cannons to hit the walls again. Trenches were dug under the city walls, and soldiers placed mines underneath them to blow them up. And over weeks of heavy bombardment, the city's defenses began to collapse, and with it blew up the morale of the fighters. It is from the intelligence and military prowess of Sultan Süleyman that he struck with a weapon to differentiate between the enemy when he gave the Serbs inside the castle safety in exchange for them to retreat from the fighting. Indeed, the fortress of Belgrade fell on the 4th of Ramadan of the same year, but the garrison of the city continued to hold and the Muslims continued to tighten the noose on them. Until it opened completely on the 26th of Ramadan. The garrison of the city announced its surrender to the Muslims. The Muslim armies entered the city and began to receive it. People sought refuge in their homes and churches, and the garrison handed over its weapons to the Muslims. After the Sultan gave them safety, the garrison began to leave the city quietly and peacefully. On the first Friday, Sultan Süleyman entered the city and prayed Friday with the Muslims and declared safety for all. He gave orders that any member of the city's residents who wants to go to the cities of Hungary should go, and no one will be harmed to him, and whoever wants to reside in the city under the rule of Muslims has protection, security, and freedom of worship. The Sultan ordered the reconstruction of the city and gave them 20,000 ounces of gold to be used in reconstruction. And the news of the fall of Belgrade came down on the kings of Europe like a thunderbolt, and with it spread terror and fear in their hearts, and they knew that they were in front of a sultan of a unique type. So the king of Russia and Venice and the rest of the kings of Europe sent him to congratulate him with the conquest and send him tribute. Belgrade's conquest was originally a series of dramatic events that struck Hungary afterward, most notably the Battle of Mohacs, which you will find in the eye sign at the top left, and the death of King Louis II. Budapest opened Hungary's capital, annexed Transylvania, and neighboring countries feared the same fate. Belgrade flourished during the long Ottoman rule, transforming it from a fortress to one of Eastern Europe's largest cities. Outside the citadel, a new city sprang up, flourishing Islamic cities and forming an advanced civilizational model for Central Europe. Belgrade remained an Islamic city for centuries. In terms of scientific movement, Muslims turned it into one of the greatest civilized cities in Europe, at the time when Europe was living in the darkness of ignorance and backwardness. This period was the golden age of the Ottoman Empire, and the power of Islam and the Muslims have proven in Europa and the world and his family, the mercy of God on the successor, and the peace of God, and the peace of God, and the peace of God.